Hi, Whitney.
Welcome to the podcast where we acknowledge that the ways we are working really aren't working anymore.
We invite you into conversations with thought leaders, coaches, and industry experts to explore strategies for living with more ease and less grind, more flow and less fight. Welcome to Untrained.
Hey, Iris.
Hey, Whitney. We are fangirling today, right?
That's hence the sequins. Whoa.
We are fangirling. And I want to go right into it because we're going to have lots of topics, but I'm going to go into the bio. So we have Dr. Amanda Blake here, and she is the author of the award-winning book, Your Body is Your Brain. If you want to hold that up, Whitney, for our YouTube audience. If you don't have it, you should buy it immediately. So stop and pause the podcast and buy this book. And she's the creator of Body Equals the Brain, course on the neurobiology of experiential leadership learning. I've taken her course. It's also amazing. So press pause and take her course. In addition to teaching about the art and science of embodiment, she works with leaders worldwide to help them become their best self, enjoy life more, and make a bigger contribution. Once an internationally competitive athlete, synchronized swimming, Mandy is skilled at cultivating high performance in herself and others. As a Master Somatic Leadership Coach, she is known for supporting pragmatic yet profound transformations in her clients. She holds a degree in human biology from Stanford University, shout out cards, and a doctorate in management from Case Western Reserve University. She's also a longtime yoga enthusiast, mountaineer, and musician. Welcome, Dr. Amanda Blake.
AKA Mandy.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about all things sort of high performance and untraining.
Well, rather than offering up what we're going to untrain, we want to really give you the floor to talk about your work in what we view as untraining.
Yeah. Gosh, where would you like me to begin? There's a lot I could say.
Right. Maybe I can tee you up with a quote that I love of yours. Your body is both a lens of perception and an instrument of action. And we as athletes, we as folks in the corporate world are really focused on that action piece and not the lens of perception and how that lens of perception has shaped us and how we can turn to it for really juicy information in our present lives.
Yeah. Oh gosh, so much I could say about that. So we do tend to overlook and underestimate our embodied intelligence. Like in the corporate world, when I talk about this, sometimes I talk about you would not be in a business negotiation where you would voluntarily just leave money on the table, right? Like you might choose to for various reasons and trade-offs, but you're not going to just leave money on the table. But every day we go into work and we leave part of our intelligence at home. And we don't even necessarily know that we're doing it, because so much of our culture is around training our intellectual capacities to move through the world in a smart way. But we don't really know that we have embodied intelligence that can actually help us move through the world in a smart way. And when you talk about lens of perception, instrument of action, so we can't actually do anything without our bodies. That includes thinking, right? Where our brain is involved in thinking, we're using glucose, we're firing neurons, right? So even something that might seem like the most disembodied thing we could do, our bodies are involved. So we're never not having our bodies involved in what action we're taking. Similarly, our body is always involved in whatever we're perceiving. And I talk about this like your body's like an antenna. And we're picking up signals and broadcasting signals all day long, every day. So you would know this in your own experience when you get like a prickly feeling when someone you are unsure of or don't like walks into the room, right? Something changes in you physically. That's your body, your antenna telling you something important. Now, maybe telling you something true or not true, accurate or not accurate, right? In the same way that we can be accurate or not accurate about mathematics, right? So the fact that we haven't trained our embodied intelligence means that most of us, like, we don't necessarily know how to discern, are we picking up an accurate signal here or not? But all the time we're picking up those signals and we're broadcasting signals. The way we show up will silently affect other people. We can talk about the neurobiology of all of that if you want to, but let me pause there and just say, like, that's how the way I see lens of perception, instrument of action. We just can't, it's on 24/7. It's not a sense that we can turn off.
I think I'm trying, this is where my brain goes, this to categorization. I'm thinking of my clients. I feel like some of them ignore that there is an antenna completely, right? So there's that extreme a little bit. Then there's, I have this antenna and I don't know what to do with it, right? Or maybe I feel like I'm in this other camp of like, I'm very sensitive to all of the things that the antenna is sending me. So I just, I feel like there's probably more categories to this, but I'm sort of categorizing my mind and thinking like, how can we help people see themselves in this, right? So I would like people when they're listening to think about themselves, like, where is the sensitivity of the antenna? And maybe one of the questions for you is, as you're coaching people through this, what types of things are you seeing? And also, how does one begin, right? So if I'm in these categories, how do I begin?
Yeah. Well, so one of the things that I want to point to first about kind of these categories that you mentioned, like some people may be unaware of or ignore those sensory messages all the way to, I can't possibly ignore them, right? And that's the whole range of human experience. In the same way that we might come in with and then cultivate a certain kind of athletic talent or musical talent, or we'll come in with different hair color or different shape of eyes or different propensity to build muscle, right? So each human being that's coming in is coming in with their own unique physical organism. And we are different biologically, we are differently tuned to be either more or less aware of what's called our interoceptive sensations. And that's sort of our visceral sensations from the inside. Most of us as athletes really train our proprioceptive capacity. So that's the ability to know where your body is in space. So if you're going to connect with a ball or move in time with a partner or respond really quickly to something moving in your environment, like all of those things require us to know where our body is in space. So as athletes in the world, we tend to really train our proprioceptive capacity. So we might be really strong there or really sensitive there, more so than someone who might have spent their life sitting in a library, training a different part of their system, right? And maybe to a really high capacity, really high degree of excellence, but they may have less proprioceptive sense. So there are all kinds of things, both biologically and culturally, that will put us on a continuum from, I have no idea what you're talking about, I can't sense anything in my body, all the way to, I can't ignore what's going on. Wherever you're starting, one thing I'll say is, wherever you're starting, this part of our brain that it makes sense of our embodied experience is as trainable, as open to learning as all of the rest of our brain. It is.
Whoa.
It is.
That sounds like something to say again.
Okay. So the neuroplasticity of the brain, in other words, the capacity of the brain to change itself through interaction with the environment, interaction with the world, is consistent throughout the entire brain. The part of our brain that helps make sense of our embodied experience is as trainable, as open to learning as the intellectual part of us that we spend, a dozen or dozens of years in school training our intellectual self, right? We don't tend to train although we may, especially in the athletic world, we may really train our proprioceptive sense, or we may really train certain athletic capacities. We don't necessarily train to go, that subtle flutter in my gut, what information is that giving me right now? And is that an accurate signal or not? The fact that I'm have my head tilted to the side, what information is that giving me, and what is that broadcasting from the antenna that's my body? And is that what I mean to be broadcasting, or is that does that information give me anything useful? We don't tend to train there, right? What's the information that our body is giving us that can help us live our lives better? So we don't tend to train our embodied intelligence. Whitney, you're chomping at the bit. What?
I was chomping at the bit. The first question, why is this good news for our listeners? Why is it good news that this part of our brain is very trainable? And why should we be interested or invested in training this part of our brain?
Well, I'll just say personally, as I entered into this kind of learning myself, I became a much nicer person and a much happier person. So it was better for me and everyone around me that I was learning how to do things like make better decisions that are more in line with what you could say what I'm really here to do, or what I really want in life, or so more aligned with kind of the deeper parts of myself. I gained the capacity to dampen some of my reactivity, right? Earlier in life, I used to be super passive aggressive. And that has changed a lot by changing my physical reactivity to situations that previously provoked that kind of behavior. So a lot of tapping our embodied intelligence is about coming to embody new behaviors that are more resourceful and that meet the moment better. So for those who are listening who might be in, for example, a workplace leadership situation, you might have to do things in your job that are difficult for you. It could be asking for help. It could be holding people accountable. It could be saying no. It could, in some cases, be saying yes. And all of us know those moments where we get kind of choked up. There's something that we want to say, but we stop ourselves from saying it. Or alternatively, there's something we just can't stop ourselves from saying, and later we regret it, right? And so a lot of that comes from a desire to alleviate a discomfort in the body that is saying, hold your voice in or shout out what it is you have to say, right? And when you learn different ways of dealing with adjusting yourself to handling, tolerating the discomfort that might lead you to action or inaction that would be maybe less effective than what you would like. When you learn to tolerate that discomfort without having it throw you off, and then make a different move, that's where embodied learning actually helps us potentially change our behavior and become much more resourceful in life. Better leadership, better decision-making, better learning, better living.
Can you give us an example of that? Do you have a question, Whitney? Sorry,
yeah,
you're
I have
chomping
a
at the bit
question
again.
that does a little more leading for that, but it goes in the exact same direction. So I'd love an example. Yeah. In your book, you talk a lot about, in general, you find that women are socialized or conditioned to hold their power back, right? Mm-hmm. Their voice back. And men are conditioned to be a little bit less connected to their hearts. And so we work a lot with our female clients about having a voice and executive presence and all these things. So could you give us a couple examples of women you've worked with who've worked on that issue specifically and how you've untrained and retrained them?
Yeah. Well, let me pull a couple of examples from the book and maybe from my own practice as well. So the book kind of covers a wide range of people, including people I personally worked with and many that I didn't. And the book called Your Body is Your Brain. Lots of good examples in there. And one thing I want to say actually is that I didn't go into writing this book thinking there's this trend for women and this trend for men in terms of how we're socialized. We all are kind of aware that there are those trends in how we're socialized on average. But I didn't go into it thinking that. I actually interviewed a ton of people for the book. And by the time I got to the end of those interviews, I started to realize, wow, this is really interesting. Like almost every example I've picked for the book has something about women holding themselves back and something about men connecting more deeply to their heart. And what I ultimately concluded was that training our embodied intelligence it doesn't matter from a gender perspective, from a race perspective, from a sexual orientation perspective, you could go on and on. The places in life where either our specific upbringing or our interaction with society has had us truncate something about our own humanity, developing greater embodied self-awareness helps us reconnect with and expand that sense of humanity. And each of us is carrying something. There's no escaping this. So it's not like we've all gone through life being traumatized. I'm not suggesting that. I think that does a disservice to people who have experienced very intense life-threatening situations. But there is no escaping the fact that we are shaped by our life experience. That shaping gets written in the form of our body. And, we may hold our shoulders up for decades, kind of bracing against something uncomfortable that might be coming our way, even into situations where we no longer need to protect against that, right? Or protect ourselves from that. So you asked for a couple of examples. Let me get to that. One specific one that comes to mind from the book, and it's not a workplace one, is a woman named Mel who had to negotiate with a contractor that had done really a very poor job doing some repairs in her home. She's a pretty small woman. She was a little bit older when this whole thing was going on. Contractor, young, beefy, strapping guy, much bigger than her. So there are those dynamics at play. And she had to really find a way to say, look, you haven't held up your end of the deal here. And that was something that throughout her life, she had a really difficult time doing. She had a really, she would get really uncomfortable when she had to confront someone directly. And she did a number of, and I write about this in the book, a number of back exercises that she was already doing for her physical health. But what she added to those exercises based on the work that she and I did together was a set of statements around having backbone and having her own back. And she was doing exercises to strengthen her back. She was building backbone. She was having her own back. She did all the same kinds of things that she would normally do to prepare for conflict, like writing down, what I think I need to say to him. But the morning of, when he was coming by to get the sign off on the whole thing, she really didn't do anything other than prepare herself physically for the confrontation. And she did a few things that were really different from what she had done before. So rather than waiting for him to come to the door, when he arrived, she walked out to meet him. So already kind of claiming her own oomph, her own power, her own dignity in that situation. And any of us listening right now can just notice, we'll say in our language, that person has backbone or they're spineless, right? And we can feel that in our own body. If you collapse your own spine, you can feel a little bit of a sense I invite you to try it right now. Collapse your own spine and you can go, I feel a little dejected. Whereas if you reach your spine up and lengthen really tall and work really hard at it, you might feel a little puffed up or arrogant. And if you just relax into actually the natural length of your own spine, letting it be its full extended length without working for it, there's a sense of dignity in that. And that's really what she found for herself. And she found herself saying to this contractor, look, the work here that we agreed upon isn't done. let's agree, this, and this. You can see there were these following mistakes, and I need you to make all of these repairs. I'm not going to pay you anymore. It should have been done right in the first place. Right. And she was able to say all of that in a really calm, collected manner because she had dignity. She had her own back in a very physical way. I'm going to pause there, but I could also give you an example from the flip side. We were talking about this in kind of a gendered way. So I could give you an example of someone else that I've worked with that had something similar.
I think that would be great. We just did an episode on men and untraining. So that would be great. And then I'll hold my question off on the nutrients for human beings, the dignity, respect, and connection. So I wanted to go into that afterwards.
Good. Okay, good. We'll talk about that too. So this is someone, I don't write about him in the book. He's someone I worked with, a physician working with a number of engineers that he perceived as being sort of out of his league, right? Incredibly smart people. Now, he's already someone who is extremely accomplished, extremely intelligent. And he found himself in these meetings with these people that he found that he was intimidated by. Like, he didn't quite know how to react. And so sometimes he would come off with a chip on his shoulder, and sometimes he would shrink back. And he just felt like he wasn't being able to communicate what he felt was really important for the program that they were building together, which was something to take care of people's health. We'll say in something sort of, I'm protecting confidentiality here, so I'm going to make something up, but it would have been similar to like a military kind of environment. Like, we really need to care for people's health here, and we need to have a system that does that really well. We need both very high technology as well as healthcare knowledge. And so he was trying to make the contribution that he had been hired to make, and really just felt like he wasn't. And I asked him, where do you feel a sense of like you at your best? And he talked about taking his small child on a hike and putting his child, who was maybe 2 or 3 at the time, up on his shoulders and walking up the hill. And we really explored, like, what's your experience of that moment? And he said, well, my shoulders are dropped. I mean, first of all, I have a child on my shoulders, but also, like, my heart is open. My chest is expanded. I feel more connected to myself, more connected to my child. And I said, well, what would be some words that you would use to describe that feeling? And where we eventually landed was the phrase, my purpose is service. Like, he really felt a real care for his child and a desire to serve his child, right? The small child who's making it only so far up the hill, and it's now my responsibility to carry you the rest of the way. And so this sense in him of my purpose of service, drawn from a really poignant and important and special moment in his life. And then we looked at, how do you take that back into the workplace? So for him, we developed a whole set of practices around dropping his shoulders, opening his chest, and saying to himself internally, my purpose is service. And what happened is, like Mel in the previous example, this individual was eventually able to go into his meetings with colleagues with embodying much more of that sense of service. I'm here to serve. And when he got connected to that sense of service and an openness and care, openness in his chest and a sense of care, he was able to show up in these meetings with people that had previously intimidated him and just offer his care into the middle of the circle. This is what I have to offer. I'm here to serve. I hope you will take this. You know, in this case, I feel really strongly that you should take this, right? He became much more capable of advocating for what he knew to be important to the project without either having a chip on his shoulder or shrinking and withdrawing. And he was able to drop maybe not entirely, right? But like being caught in comparison, these other folks are somehow better than me or smarter than me or more accomplished than me, and just relax into my purpose is service. And it softened the whole way that he showed up and made him much, much more effective in offering his contribution to the team, which is what he had been hired to do. So that's another example. There's tons more examples in the book, right, of a gentleman who worked at a bank. He was a very intellectual banker who similarly learned to kind of drop his shoulders, straighten up, feel his heart, and wound up developing the whole environmental team at his company where there had been none before, right? So lots of examples like that where we do kind of need to unlearn some of our embodied habits in order to start to embody new behaviors, new ways of being that will make us more effective in the situations in life where it's most important to us to be effective.
I think about like what is the interchange of these antenna and signals that will help you most align to your best self. And it sounds like both of your examples that using the embodiment practice to stay in the moment, because we can so often think about, oh, this person's thinking about something, they don't think I'm competent, or you're overthinking the scenario, you're thinking backwards, you're thinking forwards. But it sounds like for both of those examples, by being embodied, they could stay in the moment and be much more aligned with their purpose and sense of self.
Yeah. So in the book, I write about something that I call embodied mindfulness in action. Mm-hmm. And there's a whole diagram, right, that we really learn to, when you get into this and start to practice certain ways of sensing yourself, you can develop an embodied mindfulness that you can take with you into challenging situations and into the joyful moments in your life that will help you be more present with yourself, more present to others, more present to the circumstances, environment that you're in. And all of that supports all the things that we've been talking about: better decision-making, more connectedness, more resilience. Research has shown that it supports flourishing, which is a measure of satisfaction and well-being, right? So we can talk about this scientifically. And also there's like an underlying deeper stream of like, when you connect to your sensations and really use that as this is the language of life, you can ask yourself, what's life telling me? How does life want to live through me now? That's actually a deeper, in some ways, more spiritual question, right? And I think it's one of the reasons why this approach to learning and approach to behavior change is so incredibly powerful. It taps us into something larger than our own individual personality, I believe.
You talk I've heard you say on podcasts that when coaches say, how does that feel in your body? That's insufficient and we have to take that much deeper. And you've given us examples of you taking that deeper. Could you operationalize how you're taking the tools you're using to take that deeper?
Yeah, for sure. So one, and I want to bring it back to the prior question about, you were asking about nutrients, right? Safety, connection, and respect. Nutrients. There are lots of ways that I talk about that. But when we look at how the brain evolved and we look across species at how the brain evolved, we see that the human brain is particularly oriented to taking care of physical safety. That's true across all species. We have a whole set of, I don't want to say tools, right? But our anatomy and physiology of our brain is kind of oriented towards how do we take care of physical safety and also psychological safety, kind of added on as I don't want to say an additional layer, but like the layer of our brain that really focuses on emotional communication, belonging, psychological safety. It's quite large in humans compared to other species. And then we and other species that have really highly social groups, dolphins, whales, dogs, have a lot of additional neural density in the parts of the brain that make sense of social communication. So our brains are really optimized for gaining these, optimizing these, what I call essential nutrients of safety, connection, and respect, or we might think of them as safety, belongingness, and dignity, right? These three things are that the human brain heavily, heavily emphasizes and really evolved to help us figure out where we fit in our social groups, communicate with others on both an emotional and intellectual level, right? So that's one of the frameworks that I'm always using, is kind of looking at that. Where is there safety, connection, and respect, or where might it be absent? And how do I grant that to myself or gain that by shifting how I am in my body, in my brain? That's one of the tools. That's maybe a little more esoteric for someone who just is like, you're starting out with this and you're like, I have no idea where to begin. Pay attention to three things. Pay attention to temperature in your body. So right now, you might notice that your core temperature is different from your temperature in your hands and feet. Or you might notice that that's the same, right? You might notice when someone says something to you, you know, oh, Mom, oh, Dad, can I please have one, you know, this candy at the store? And you've been asked a million times and you're about to lose your mind. You might notice that your temperature is particularly warm or particularly cool. So pay attention to temperature. Pay attention to pressure. So pressure lies on a continuum all the way from something really tight or hard or dense, right? All the way to something that's really open or loose or relaxed or expanded. So again, you can pay attention to, in your body, where might you feel pressure? And there will be times when we feel a certain kind of solidity that feels really grounded and solid, or other times when we might feel a heaviness that feels uncomfortable, or it might be associated with a down mood. Similarly, you might feel really open, upbeat, happy, alive, with lots of sort of bubbly feelings. That's on the continuum of movement. So pay attention to sort of on a continuum of active to stillness. So temperature, pressure, and movement are three really important places to pay attention. You might feel this bubbly aliveness, but you also might feel a really alive and vibrant stillness, right? A sense of quiet, but you're really alive in it. Or you could feel very quiet, numb, and shut down, right? So paying attention to those three things and sort of the quality of sensation there, really, really important. And for those of you for whom that just feels inaccessible or hard, another great place to pay attention is the position of your body in space. Are my shoulders up or down? Is my chest open or closed? Am I more narrow or wide? And think about the fact that we are three-dimensional beings, right? So you have your length up, down, you have side to side, you have front to back. Notice where you are, front to back, side to side. Notice your facial expressions. Notice your gestures. All of these will give you clues as well. And you can start to, as you pay more and more attention, you can start to make connections between my experience of anger, or my experience of joy, or my experience of sadness, or my experience of enthusiasm seems to go along with these kinds of bodily sensations. And when this has been studied, we do see patterns across humans. So we'll see, for example, when people are experiencing love, a real flush of warmth in the body. That's very common, and on average, that will be a common experience. But for each one of us, we're very individually unique. And so this is a very individual and very, very experiential journey of learning and discovering what's my own sort of signature response to various things that might be going on in life.
One of the things that Iris and I talked about today, we were like, Mandy's so calm. And I was just noticing how much calmer I feel sort of attuning to you and listening to you than I did at the beginning when I was all aflutter. Is that also a byproduct of this work for you, or have you always been this way?
Well, that's a good question. It is absolutely, in my view, it is absolutely a byproduct of this work, because I know I'm much calmer than I ever was, especially in difficult situations. And it's likely, you'd have to ask people that know me, right? And that knew me when. But I would say it's likely that I had some of that in me to begin with. And that it's something that I've cultivated, right? It's something that I've been able to train. I don't want to suggest that calm is a better way to be.
I like calm.
Calm is extremely helpful in certain kinds of situations. Mm-hmm. So, for example, if you are at the Olympics, standing on the platform, getting ready to do your final Olympic dive, right? And there's a lot riding on that. Calm is enormously helpful. Having all the nerves, and you're gonna have that, right? But having all the nerves take over so that they throw you off, that's not helpful, right? So the more you can handle and stay calm within, oh boy, a lot is riding on this, whether it's the high dive, whether it's a big presentation because you're trying to gain money for you're talking to the VCs about getting around to funding for your company, or whether it's you're presenting to the CEO or you are the CEO, right? Like there are lots of situations that call on us for high performance, and our capacity to step into those situations, feel all of the discomfort of, in a sense, going on stage or performing or being in the competition. It's really helpful to be able to feel all the sensations and not have them throw you off. Mm-hmm. And so what I would say is, and this is something that in the research literature and more in the popular literature is known as widening your window of tolerance. Mm-hmm. So being able to tolerate sensations that might throw you into a state of hypoarousal, where you'll shut down, not say the thing you need to say, maybe get tense in your body, maybe get cold, right? Or hyperarousal, where you maybe get very activated. You're talking too fast, you're really nervous, you don't really, right? And so the more that we can sort of expand our window of tolerance through practices like some of the things that I've described here, the more effective we can be in high pressure situations.
So this is in juxtaposition. We all were athletes in the late 80s, 90s. It was deal with it, right? So that was what we were taught was, I know you have these emotions, but swallow them down, right? And so this is not what you're saying. You're saying this is so different. It's getting to know yourself in these situations and broadening that tolerance. And for me, just my own example is, I think that when I broaden the tolerance, one of the things I think about is who can help me in that too. It's not just me understanding myself, but I may be trying to broaden the tolerance with something that might trigger me in a meeting. And so I might go through the meeting. Maybe no one sees the difference, but I might want to call on Whitney and say, hey, this is how I felt. So I just want to say too is whenever we talk about these things, we do talk about there is work that you're going to do, but please do this with the support of others as well. And so I think in my experience, it always felt like, because I did an individual sport as opposed to you guys, as I always felt like, oh, this is on me. I have to know myself, which is fine, and I do. But I think in some ways we do need support, meaning, let's say I am working on something like this and I talk to my manager and I say, hey, I'm working on having a better response to this situation. Can you help me with this? And I think that's the next level that I wish we would get to, right? Of saying like, look, here's a vulnerability I have and I'm working on it and this is what I see. Can you help me work on this? So I wanted to bring that up too, because that's actually helped me a ton as well. Because if I did this work in a vacuum, I would only get so far. But if I do this work and I can be vulnerable with others and they can help me and support me as I broaden the window of tolerance, I think that's really important too. I just wanted to state that because we do sometimes talk about that.
And borrowing the regulation of other people's nervous systems.
Yeah.
Borrowing that.
Yeah, really. I'm so glad you brought that in. So coming back to the image of embodied mindfulness in action. So I have that image in my head. Nobody else has it. But in the book, what you would see is like, here's an individual interacting with another individual inside of a context, right? Of a wider context. And one of the, as you say, like borrowing somebody else's nervous system regulation, it's what
in the picture
babies require, and it's why it's so essential that infants be held, is that physically they don't yet know how to regulate their nervous system, and so they need to sync up with someone else who's calm. And we need to be able to do that in adulthood too. Sometimes we actually need to be held, right? But sometimes we just need to be held in kindness, right? And in a workplace situation, finding someone who can have your back, who can be an ally, who can, if they're in the room with you when you know you get thrown off, and they can support you. And there's two ways. One is helping you find your own ground in those difficult situations. The other is challenging you to go further, challenging you to see yourself where you have blind spots, right? And so it can be really, I would say, two things I might recommend. One is if this is interesting and you're inclined to grab the book, read the book with a friend or a group of friends and go through some of the things that I recommend in the book with friends, and talk about this so that you have people in your corner who are speaking the same language. And then the other thing would be to find someone who's been trained in this or a similar methodology and work with them to, have an expert eye on what you're doing. And of course, as athletes, as corporate athletes, like we're used to looking to a coach and going, how'd that swing go? Right? How was I at bat this time? And that level of feedback is enormously valuable, because this is a place where most of us, we haven't had that kind of expert support. So both of those I think are really important. And then the last thing I'll say there is, not yet, but within the next year or two, I'm working on a book right now, and I don't know when it's going to be released. But it is a book of your body as your brain really answers the question of like, why does embodied practice, the right kinds of embodied practice, embodied attention, embodied awareness, lead to positive behavior change? Why would that work? And it's an exploration of the neurobiology. The next book is really about how. And it really is like, here's how you could put this into practice for yourself. Here are some things that you can do. So I just want to say, keep an eye out for that, because that's coming. It's under construction. And I think that's going to be really helpful for people who do want to gather with a group of friends and just go, let's try this together.
We've lost your
embodied book club, I said.
Embodied book club is what you said. Embodied Book Club. Well, I know we've reached we could talk forever, but we've reached the end. And I thought maybe we could, if there's anything you want the audience to take away, Mandy, from our discussion today, what would it be? And we sort of end there. What are your thoughts or conclusions? We go around the table.
Well, I am really curious to hear what you all have to say about that. I think the biggest thing that I want to say is just to come back to something I said at the beginning, which is don't inadvertently leave intelligence on the table. We actually have such a tremendous wealth of resource, knowledge, information in our embodied intelligence, and learning how to tap it and tap it well can be life-altering in the most positive of ways. So I hope listeners that made it all the way to the end are inspired to go discover that path for themselves, or go further on it if it's already something they're exploring.
And what I'd like to say is, one of your quotes is, your brain is a wonderful tool, it's just not the only one. And I think that in a lot of the cultures where people are living and working, your body is sort of like that floofy thing that, maybe we don't want to listen to. And I really appreciate that you have done the research that says, here's evidence, scientific evidence that it is powerful and that it is a powerful tool and is one that Iris and I really deeply respect and are learning more about within ourselves and for our clients. So I'm just very grateful to you for helping the body get more on the map as a vital tool that deserves to be listened to and treated with dignity. Iris, what about you?
I think as someone who has not always seen their body as an ally, I think that's when I was going through the program and also now thinking about it and having this conversation is how do I continue to be teammates with my body? How do I use it to help support, and how can I support myself through my sensations and feelings, emotions, and utilizing myself as a holistic performance vehicle? How about that? That's a holistic performance vehicle. Can I trademark that? All right. Well, I appreciate your time, and we're huge fans of yours, and we hope that our audience are also become huge fans of yours. And it was such a pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.